Hello, and welcome to the I Know That Feel podcast. I'm your host, DJ Whitebill, and this is the very first episode, so please forgive any technical difficulties, any audio issues. There's a little bit of, cutting and spiking and stuff like that, but we'll get the hang of it. So, for the very first episode, I interviewed Brett Stevens. He is the owner and writer for America.org, as well as deathmetal.org. So there's lots of metal, lots of punk in this episode. Hope you enjoy it. And if you don't, if you're very picky with your taste of music, check the show notes. There's a version without any music at all. There's also a version you can listen to the entire thing consecutively. But we decided to cut it up into more digestible formats. So now there are 3 chunks. And without further ado, check it out.
Numbers up, you have to go. System says I told you so. Stopped in a plane like a truckload of cattle. Set off to slaughter in a useless battle. Dozens of us sent off to die. Never really knowing why. Fuck the system, they can't have me. I don't need society.
So, can you just give a quick introduction, like who you are, how would you define yourself philosophically, politically, all of the above?
Thank you for having me on the podcast. This is a good deal of fun, and I'm looking forward to it. I would say that I am someone who specializes in civilization collapse. I'm fascinated by how civilizations decide to destroy themselves because mine has. So it's a very practical use to figure out what's going on and whether it can be counteracted. I'm sort of like a doctor standing over a patient in a hospital who's got a syndrome that we don't quite recognize. We're pretty sure he's going to die anyway, but we're going to do the best we can to bring him back. And so my background has been in extreme right-wing politics, mainly because I realized at an early age that the left can't say no to people. They're very good at telling you what rights you have and what you can do and how you should, if it feels good, do it and chase your dreams and we are all one. But it's basically a bunch of feelings and herd behavior that is legitimized by what they say. And so it doesn't really help when you're saying, we're in a bad place and we're going to need to cut out a lot of things that aren't working and start doing things that do work instead. And I think we're at that place. I think I've known my whole life that we are in a Rome-style collapse that is going to coincide with ecocide and global calamity, and that it has been brought on by something that no one suspects is an evil, but actually is evil. And so in expressing that, I've raged across the internet and some print for the last 25 or 30 years, writing sort of various takes on this feeling, this knowledge about what's going on with Western civilization. And so I guess at this point, most people know me from America.org, which is sort of like the right-wing site that the internet loves to ignore when it can, but is always slightly unnerved by. And it's been fun doing this because I get to be the commentator behind the scenes that is able to offer sort of a 20,000-foot view or a 30,000-foot view when everyone else is focused more on the immediate. And so it's been a lot of fun over the past 2+ decades to see predictions that I've made come true, although, of course, they haven't been about good things, so it's of limited fun because it's sort of tragic. But that's essentially what I do. I write about nihilism, politics, and I have a past writing about death metal, of course, but that's really all I do at this point, and I have a good time doing it.
Right on. You had mentioned some of the predictions that came true. I wanted to ask, I haven't delved deep enough into it to fully understand, but I saw that you had a phrase alt-right, which I think you may have coined it, I'm not sure, but that's ULT, like ultra-right. And I saw some overlap, actually. So, like, in reference to the predictions, one of the people that I really like in the community or the movement, however you want to name it, his name's Nick Fuentes, and he's a paleocon, and there's a lot of people like him that are, the optics debate, which is very big in the dissident right, which is why I think a lot of people have totally abandoned the phrase alt-right. They're like, oh, I'm not alt-right, and, and I've seen a couple articles on America.org talking about white nationalism and how it's toxic for your goals of actually, sustaining your people and either sustaining your civilization or building a new one, whatever your goal is, but it's clearly counterproductive. And so, to me, that's the first thing that came to mind as far as predictions. Can you kind of elaborate a little bit and tell me where you think these things overlap? For me personally, I'm a libertarian, and like many libertarians that have, in recent years, because of the migrant crisis and stuff, we've slowly been red-pilled and slowly been shifting further and further in the spectrum. I don't know if you want to put it in a quadrant system, but further up, I guess, more authoritarian. And most people, like my friends who are Marxists and leftists, they don't get that. And they say, that's hypocritical and you're not a true libertarian and all this bullshit. But I think it actually makes sense. And so I guess, can you explain alt-right, how it differentiates, and I guess where you think there's some overlap between paleocon, libertarian, alt-right, dissident right, etc., and which of the predictions you've made that have come true?
Well, that is a fascinating question because we're talking about this incredibly interesting landscape that exists on the right. The left is fairly monolithic. They have one idea, equality, and different levels to which they're willing to go to achieve it. Some are like, full communism, total authoritarianism. We're going to force these damn people to be equal even if we have to put them in gulags. And others are sort of more toward the mild zone. And I think somewhere in the middle, actually, is libertarianism, which I would say is fundamentally a left-wing philosophy because it's based on an assumption of equality. But it's also got some right-wing elements in that it's social Darwinism. You're saying, well, some are going to rise, some are going to fall, and the only equality they get is what in the United States we call natural rights, meaning you're born and you're free to achieve whatever you can and no one should obstruct you from achieving things. But the fundamental assumption is that you can just sort of take this large group, this large fungible mass of people, and give them some rights and freedoms, and that something good will come from it, and that it will organize itself in a bottom-up way. And ultimately, I don't think that's true. And I think this is why people drift toward what I'm going to call strong authority as opposed to authoritarianism, meaning that we realize that the bell curve is real and that people act like sheep in herds. And these two things are both very important because they're both relevant. First, the bell curve, most people just aren't that bright. And so when you tell them things, you're going to get a simplistic solution and they will not understand why that's wrong through something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. You can only understand things up to your intellectual level, and anything more complex than that sounds like bizarre nonsense and superstition to you, and you're going to laugh at it. And that's the first factor. 90% of humanity is not going to understand the complex political ideas that we're going to need to look at to solve our even most basic problems. The second thing I find to be even more pernicious, and I write about this where others don't, and it's the committee effect, which is that when you take a group of people together, even highly intelligent people, even geniuses, and you get them to sit in a committee and vote on things and participate in some sort of compromise-based, divided authority type setup, you're going to get terrible results because everyone is going to adjust their expectations to what they think the group will support, which means you're always going to be heading to a lower level, to a lowest common denominator, reversion to the mean, that kind of thing. And they dumb it down so that other people can understand it. And basically, they become political creatures. Instead of thinking what is right, they're thinking, what can I convince other people of? What's going to make me look good? What's going to make me friends here? And so, when you think about those things, you realize that democracy is a dead letter. Not only will it not achieve what we want, but it's going to destroy us if we let it, because the committee mentality and other forms of this communication and process between people are going to take anything true and anything real, and they're going to turn it into the equivalent of an American fast food cheeseburger. They're going to add sugar, salt, and fat. They're going to overcook it. They're going to package it in plastic that is going to stick around for 30,000 years. and they're going to essentially destroy anything good about it. And so for a lot of us, I think we're frustrated by the optics debate because we think it's nonsense. I don't really think optics is what we're talking about when we are talking about a rejection of National Socialism and white nationalism. I think we're talking about the fact that these people tend to be brutal and sadistic and murder people. And we're divided because Hitler did a lot of cool things. You know, he had cool uniforms. He was the last time... It's true.
It is true.
Hitler is one of history's badasses. He looks badass, and most importantly, he's the last time anybody was afraid of white people. After that, it's been, your standard wimpy white guy in a Hollywood movie. Oh, look at what the Negroes are doing. That's really fascinating. And I think that Hitler was the last time people were like, holy crap, white people, we should be nice to them.
Well, hey, I mean, we can argue if Slavs are white, if we want to go down that road. But, I mean, come on, Putin, Stalin, all these people, they're definitely Eastern. But those are the ones that I think that's part of why, white nationalists glob onto that, even though there's a lot of... It seems counterintuitive that people who like National Socialists would love Putin. I mean, partly it's propaganda and stuff. Because I tell them, I said, dude, they hate Nazis. You know that, right? Like, Russians really don't like Nazis for obvious reasons because of their history. But, yeah, I just got to throw that out there. I think Russians, there's a stand-up comedian who says that.
I currently live in New York City, which is, it's there. I've been living in New York about 6 years now, and when I first moved there, I had a huge fear I was going to get mugged, constantly. Like, every time I left the house, I was like, here it comes. Someone's going to take everything. I got over my fear because I learned a trick, and now I use this trick all the time. Whenever I think someone might try to beat me up or mug me, I fake a Russian accent. You're welcome. It's genius. I'll be walking home late at night. Two dangerous-looking thugs walk up to me like, yo, man, you know what neighborhood you're in? You think this bad neighborhood? Russians are the scariest white people. They've earned it. I'm so scared of them that I guarantee you if I was lost, dangerously lost, there is no way I'd ask a Russian for directions. Just real quick, like, sir, help me. Please help me. How do I get to the subway? This subway? Walk down the street and turn corner. Yeah, screw that. I think I'm just going to stay lost.
Maybe that's because they're not Western Europeans. I guess last time people were afraid of Western Europeans. Yes, I think probably Hitler. But anyways, go ahead.
Well, Stalin remains massively popular among Russians because he was the last time they were relevant. And I think that's definitely true. Now, you don't know this, but I grew up in a Russian neighborhood. And really? I have seen Russians interact with the different other races, and I have shocked people by saying I'd rather live around Mexicans. I would actually rather live around Mexicans than Vietnamese or Chinese as well. Mexicans may steal your hubcaps. Well, they will steal your hubcaps. They don't do certain things involving house maintenance, but generally I think they're friendly and they have a sense of community. I didn't sense that among the Vietnamese, the Russians, or the Chinese. They will watch their neighbor's house burn to the ground. They will just watch. They will sit there and watch it burn to the ground. Your Mexican neighbor will show up with some water and a beer. You're going to get a Modelo Especial in your hand and a bucket of water, and good luck to you. But, it's different races and ethnic groups have different approaches to things, and I think that Russians have their own approach that really is more Asiatic than Western. And it's interesting to see it play out in a neighborhood that you've known that was originally a German-American neighborhood. Stalin was impressive in that he was really ultimately a pure nihilist functionalist. He may have killed several million people just to wake up his population to the fact that they were under strong authority. He was super functional in that sense. He really was a literalist. He knew that if he had to make people work in a certain way, if he had to compel them in a certain way, he was going to do it with terror. And the world feared him to a degree. But then again, he also failed in certain ways that even Hitler didn't. But taking it back to the bigger debate, I don't think optics is the issue. I think we're afraid of things that fail, and things like white nationalism fail by pointing people in the wrong direction. And if I were going to say, where I'd come down on the line if my two choices were libertarianism and white nationalism, I'd say libertarianism, although obviously leaning strongly toward nationalism simply because it works. But the reason is that white nationalism is sort of a leftist-modeled ideology in the same way that National Socialism was. It's messianic. It has a moral component. We should do this. We must do this. That deviates too much from what we know actually works. And this is sort of the big drum roll here, I don't think it's extreme enough. I think we need to escape from the modern model entirely. And while Hitler looked cool and Stalin looked cool, the model of having a dictator up there ranting and mass mobilizing people is not natural, and it's not functional. We need something more like an ecosystem, an organic society. And so to create that, I designed the alt-right, which is basically a very simple mixture of traditional bits. You want an aristocracy. You want a social caste system. You want a strong culture protected by nationalism, but even more, a positive culture that people are saying, well, it's not just that we're not French or Russians or Germans or whatever. It's that we are this unique people, and we love this, and these are the things that we do. We have a sense of purpose. And then you want a positive reward system, which I think is where you have the most overlap with libertarianism. I think that after the Cold War, we've seen that negative reward systems, meaning do this or you get shot, are less effective than positive reward systems, meaning do this and you get rich. Whatever it is, I think we need to reward people positively and not focus as much on trying to kill all the bad guys. And I will grant you that there's going to be, in the future, inevitably, there's going to be some kill or exile all the bad guys. There's no way to avoid that at this point. The mess is too huge. But I tend to lean on the side of exile. Send them away. We want to focus on the people who are doing good things. And that's where the positive reward system comes in. And that sense of culture, in the traditional view, overlaps with faith, with religion, with customs, with metaphysical belief, or the lack thereof. I mean, some cultures are entirely transcendental, meaning they think that there's nothing more than the material, but you do get a sense of the beauty of it, the purpose of it, the intensity of it, and that's enough for them. And so the alt-right is really a response to everyone who's like, yeah, I want to be hardcore and badass, I'm going to go as far right as I can, and they get out the uniforms and the mustache and, the gas chambers or whatever, and I'm saying, Hitler really was too far leftist. He was a socialist, and he believed in this kind of modern system. So did Mussolini. He believed that he could set up a modern society to make things work and, harness the power of industry and propaganda and all those things. And I'm saying, because of a related philosophy I developed called Crowdism, I'm saying that anything that requires mass mobilization is going to go down the tubes the exact same way everything's going down the tubes now. And we need, instead of this centralized model where there's one source of power in the center and everybody kind of obeys that, we need a gently tiered hierarchical model that is highly informal so that it's not as easy to subvert, based on the quality of people. And then you factor into that the positive goals that you want people to have: a sense of purpose, positive reward system, a cultural identity, an idea that there is a natural beauty to hierarchy, both in terms of who your leaders are and in terms of who the members of your society are. I mean, most people have forgotten here that we've always had a simple caste system here in the West, but it's a very important one because people are born differently and they need to have a role somewhere that's specifically for them in the social order so that they're not constantly worried about being displaced. One of the things about the modern system, whether capitalist or communist or some hybrid of the two, like National Socialism and fascism, is that you never really have this immutable place where you belong. You're always subject to market forces or ideological forces or someone from above showing up and, whipping out a Luger, having 5 people shot, and then saying, everyone do this. And so, in this sense, I think we're really getting beyond the optics debate. Optics is saying, well, we're going to scare off the normies if we put swastikas on things. And I'm saying I think we shouldn't put swastikas on things because I don't think it worked, despite a lot of good people being involved with it. I think a lot of people had a lot of faith in National Socialism, and I think they, like any leader, they did a lot of things right. I mean, I can look at Barack Obama and say, I think he did things 60% right. And I'd say the same about Hitler. He's like a Barack Obama. I think he got most of it right, within the context of his time, I should say. I mean, in an absolute sense, I'd say Barack Obama is completely wrong, but he's operating within a democracy, so there's only so much he can do. If I were making the decisions, I probably would have agreed with him on 60% of them, and the remaining 40%, of course, were hard, but, oh well. Hitler, I think, did many things well. He also did some things that I find baffling because they seem more like emotional tantrums than reality, and I think that's something we need to get the hell away from. I'm also very skeptical of the scapegoating. I think it's one thing to say we stand against Jewish materialism, but it's another thing to say the Jew is the source of all our problems, because that's clearly not true. The Jew wasn't a force in Europe until the French Revolution. Previously, they were a cultural force that was mostly marginalized. And so we're either ascribing to them Superman qualities, where these Jews showed up and just brainwashed everybody somehow remotely, or we're looking more at a realistic model, which is that diversity is a horror, and when you bring in a population, especially a talented population, you're guaranteeing that there's going to be clashes. But when you go full Hitler and you say this is the source of European decline, you're ignoring many, many years of history that show a steady path through the Renaissance to the Enlightenment toward this new sense of individualism we've found, where we break free from the old models and religious traditions and cultural traditions and all of these things, and we're just this new man, this new individual who's wiser than anything else, and our desires and our needs and our ideation, our feelings, all of these matter more than all those fusty old social orders and things like that. And that, I think, is the root of our problem, that we grew prosperous, we became individualistic, we didn't fight it hard enough, and then it took over, and now you've got a crowd of people saying, yes, we're all individuals, and they're proceeding to ruin absolutely everything they encounter. And so we're trying to gain control of ourselves. So I don't think the Jew is a huge part of this. I don't think the Negro is a huge part of this. I don't think we can scapegoat the rich either. I think we should stop scapegoating and instead focus on practical solutions. The problem is that I think some things are mimetically addictive. Making fun of Jews is hysterical.
In today's tough economic times, money stresses can really be overwhelming.
Yeah, but help is on the way. Author Christine Eckert is here to show us some exercises to reduce stress. Hi, Christine.
Good morning.
Hi, Jim and Tracy.
Christine, I'm so glad you're here. I'm about ready to snap.
She is.
The first thing we're going to learn about is problem visualization.
Okay.
It's a simple method for reducing stress by assigning an image to represent your anxiety.
Well, that sounds simple enough.
Okay, the first thing I like to do is imagine my money-related stress as the most disgusting, terrifying creature I can think of. I like to imagine an ugly, greasy little creature with a hooked nose and oily black hair.
Oh, he is scary.
I call him the Grabbler because he's a greedy little monster who wants to grabble up all my money. Now close your eyes and picture the Grabbler.
Okay, there he is.
Now think of all the problems your Grabbler is causing. He invented interest rates like the ones on your credit card.
Oh.
He's taking the jobs because Grabblers only hire their own kind.
I just want to get rid of
Now
him.
imagine the Grabbler slowly disintegrating like a pile of ashes blown away by a purifying wind. And now you're in a peaceful meadow full of lilies swaying in a gentle breeze. They're not scheming or trying to rob me.
Oh, well, that really works.
Ooh, what a relief. I feel so relaxed.
Now, this image visualization works for other kinds of stresses besides money, right?
Say you had an argument with someone at work. Take that social stress and visualize it being due to a blabbler.
Blabbler. Well, look at that.
Blabblers represent all that negative energy we experience when dealing with difficult personalities. You know, the kinds of people who love to argue and complain in nasal voices.
Oh, I know
Yes,
people
and
like
stresses
that.
are everywhere,
Right.
too.
They are. They're always lurking like rats. You know, that's why sometimes meditative exercises aren't enough. So take your mind off your stress by doing something good for yourself. Exercise.
Oh, I know.
Okay,
I feel
excellent.
better after my yoga class.
Right.
I will often go for a long walk in the middle of the night and throw flaming bottles at certain houses, or even sneak in through the back doors and light their curtains on fire while they're asleep.
Working up a sweat to rid yourself of that stress. All right, well, Christine, thanks so much for being our guest this morning and sharing
Christine.
your advice. Everyone should check out Christine's new book, The Solution, Kill All the Grabblers, and it's available in bookstores now.
And it makes people get caught up in this stuff. And I think, the lawnmower won't start. You say, oh, the lawnmower's pink Jewish, and everybody laughs, and you get it, because every society has something that it thinks of as its other, and it chooses to make fun of and relentlessly, you ascribe all bad things to it, right? And that's very addictive. But the problem is that's also misleading. That's when I talk about the problems of mass culture and mass mobilization, this is what I see, and this ties into this idea of crowdism. When you give to mobilize a herd.
So, sorry, just to interrupt really quick. I don't want to debate semantics, but I think it's important to clarify. As far as crowdism, can you explain that a little bit? And just before you do, in my mind, a lot of what you're saying reminds me of two people that I really respect in the quote unquote movement, which is Jared Taylor and Sam Dixon. And I just recently stumbled upon Sam Dixon, and I don't know how I didn't see him before. But one thing I like about Jared in regards to what you're saying is the Jewish question. They're not stupid. They're woke on the JQ. They know what there's certain things. I don't want to say dog whistles because they're not trying to do a dog whistle, but you can tell in certain things that they say. They're not stupid. They know. And it's not just strategy, in my opinion. I mean, I can't speak for what they're actually doing, but it doesn't seem like it's purely strategy. I think something that we all need is what you're saying, is that don't just focus on one and scapegoat. And it's not to say that they're not innocent victims. I mean, it's not a coincidence, that you've heard that time and time again, 109 countries, there is something there. But you're right that I think people focus on it too much, and it just becomes, it becomes a meme basically. And it's, they're not they're not introspective enough. And that's one thing that I really like about Jared is he says, okay, well, why was it so easy for us?
As far as blaming others for our own failings, I do think that there is a tendency among some of our comrades to wish to find fault in someone else. They look at the devastation we have made of our own societies, of our own mentality, and they think, how could we possibly have done that? There must be an enemy. And I think there was a hand pushing at that door. I don't disagree, but that door rotted from within. And that is how the enemy has come into our ranks. And just as many blacks blame us if it rains on their birthday, I think we have to look into our own psyches, our own history. We must find our strength in our own traditions and the own battles our ancestors have fought.
And I think that's what you mean by culture. And the other thing really quick about Sam Dixon, he calls himself a communitarian. I think he calls it a racial communitarian, which reminds me, and I don't know exactly what he means by that. I've seen a few, so I'm sure there's some overlap with crowdism. For me personally, and when I say libertarian, I got to clarify as well that I'm not like bottom left quadrant where I just want child porn and guns and just, it's not just that. Is that I understand human nature. I think it's Western European. I think it's in my blood. And especially American blood, I think my ancestors had a big authority complex. And Sam Dixon actually says that's kind of one of the downfalls of America, is that it would basically, it was an artificial selection for the gypsies of the Western European people who were just like, didn't give a shit about community, didn't give a shit about the hierarchy, and just said, leave me the fuck alone. And there's a lot of strengths in that, and I think, this can go into a very big debate of Protestantism versus Catholicism, and are those avatars of our genetics? I mean, did Protestantism come from our blood, which is more individualist, the rugged individual? That's a whole nother can of worms. But at the very least, I think it speaks to me, and that's why I like identitarian. And I think it's, again, this is just semantics, but for me, when I say identitarian, I say I'm a libertarian, minarchist, identitarian. And it's all semantics. Who gives a shit? But I think there's overlap with our ideologies. But for me, there's an implicit my identity comes from my genetics, which comes from this I guess higher power, this essence that connects us all. So, in and of itself, when I say identitarian, to me that means communitarian. That means whatever I think you mean by crowdism. But can you just elaborate on crowdism and differentiate and what does it mean?
Well, I'd like to first say that I enjoy Jared Taylor. I've communicated with him over the years, and I think he has an unerring instinct for the realistic, and yet not giving up on what must be done. Meaning, most people confuse the pragmatic with the realistic. Realistic is saying essentially this is what we need to do to survive in reality. Pragmatic is saying, well, this is what we can get by the committee, And so I think we have that sort of eternal pragmatism versus realism tension on the right, and optics is a huge part of that. But I think Taylor has navigated it admirably over the years. I'm less familiar with Dixon, but I think highly of him based on what I've seen. I think that communitarianism, as I understand it, does have some aspects of redistribution of wealth. It's an attempt at a third front, which back in the 90s was what everybody wanted. Oh, there must be a third way that's not capitalist or socialist, but has elements of both. And I think sometime in the 2010s, people started to realize that was kind of nonsense. Chesterton tried things along these lines with his idea of a community-based quasi-redistribution. People like me would come down much more hard on the libertarian angle because we hate all wealth redistribution. Simply, in my case, for Nietzschean reasons. I think it's anti-Darwinistic. Do I have great compassion for people who are struggling? Yes. Do I support charities with my time and money? Yes. Do I think that's a great idea? Yes. I think there should always be a church door open for those who've had something horrible happen to them, because life can really do horrible things to good people. But at the same time, would I ever support a welfare program? No. People start talking about redistributing wealth, I reach for my gun. Literally, I think it's one of those things that sounds good to everyone, but is deeply, deeply toxic, and it's a hidden toxicity in that it doesn't happen for a while. You implement the program, 30 years later, everything goes to hell, and everyone's just sitting around going, "Well, I don't know what happened," and you're thinking, there's more to this than people will acknowledge. But anyway, let's talk about Jews for a bit, because everybody loves Jews. And no, seriously, I can write.
Let's get back to the matter at hand.
I can write an article. I can write two identical articles. One will be something like how the Federal Reserve has bottomed out American economy, and the second will be how the Federal Reserve has bottomed out the American economy and Jews. And the second one is going to get 10,000 more readers. People friggin' love Jews. It's just like Hitler. I mean, I think they're on par. I mean, everyone's like, oh, what's the dastardly Jew doing today? Where did he put his finger before he sniffed it? And they've taken on a mythological quality, and I find it intensely entertaining. But I'll tell you this: I grew up in a majority city, meaning that white people are less than a quarter of the population here. I have been around every conceivable minority group that is in the United States or Europe, and in numbers. And I grew up with a lot of Jewish people, and I had an opportunity through my various jobs to know a lot of upper middle class Jewish people. So we're not
talking... Here comes all the conspiracies about how you're a shill and you're getting paid shekels, but go ahead, continue.
I understand why people would say that, and I think that I have been privileged in so many ways as an observer to see things that I think most people do not. And they're very hard to communicate. I'm a nihilist. I don't believe that communication actually exists. I think you and I are attempting to communicate here using some sound tokens, some words, syllables, that we roughly understand the same meaning by. And the fact that we're genetically similar means we have a chance in hell of possibly understanding each other. But I don't think communication by itself exists. I think it's a good faith activity that's based on approximation, and you can't really show people things other than what they've seen. And William S. Burroughs said something interesting about this. He compared a writer to a camera. He said, I've gone out there, I've had these experiences, and I'm trying to show them to you in story form because you wouldn't believe me if I just told you. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think that most people have not had an experience like Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises, where they've gotten to know a wealthy and successful Jewish person to the point that they could see the torment in that person. And I would say that for all the JQ out there and all the nasty things that people say about Jews, these pale in comparison to what Jews think about themselves. I think they are an intensely conflicted population, which is brought on, much as happens with Italians, Slavs, and Southern Europeans, and of course the Irish, by their mixed race nature. They know that they are not from an unbroken bloodline. They know that they are mixed Asiatic. They look at quote-unquote Aryan people, your Nordic, Germanic, blonde, slender, blue-eyed, high intelligence, long face, with envy. They wish they were that. And I think that's not unique to them either. I think everyone kind of is like, if I could look like these people and have their capabilities, I think I'd do that. I'd like to be Nordic, I'd like to be just some Viking somewhere hanging out, being, 7 feet tall and slender and intelligent, having all these deep thoughts. Everyone wants that. I think you'll find that with the Chinese, with the Mexicans, with the Indians, with the Arabs, who are generally called Muslims, but really, let's talk about them racially. They're Arabs or mixed race people. I think all of these groups have that, and I don't think Jews are unique in that. And I would further say I don't think Jews are unique in their behavior. Every single damn thing you ascribe to the Jew is also there in the Chinese. It's there in a slightly less competent version, because they're not as smart as the Chinese, among the Vietnamese. It's even there among the Japanese. These populations, however, are more aware of their foreignness. The Jewish population will forever be confused because they can both be Jewish and outsiders and sometimes pass for white. Everyone's like, oh, I thought he was Italian. He looked Italian, whatever. He's a Jew, I didn't know. And so I think they tend to be more active participants in parts of our culture that get them in trouble, like Hollywood, like being in the media, like being in government, like working for the government, since a lot of them have government jobs, like being lawyers, like being doctors, professionals, architects, that kind of thing, because I think they can pass. Where when, some guy shows up and has a name that sounds like a dish at your local Chinese restaurant, looks obviously foreign, and has trouble with basic white social skills, he's excluded. I think the Jew can socialize very well with the white. And that's where most of this tension comes from. So I would say, when we talk about the Jew, most of what we are talking about is diversity. And let me qualify that. Every group has trouble with diversity. Within that context, every group also has its unique symptoms, if we could call it that way, because cultures are different. The Negro, for example, he likes violent crime, violent, pointless crime. How many times have we read about a black guy robbing a convenience store for $26 and change, and he shot some guy during the process? I read these news stories, and I'm just like, what the hell is going on with this thinking? Well, it's just the type of thinking you need to survive in Central Africa, I believe. You need to go get the other guy and make him dead, regardless of how much it benefits you, because the cultures that arise there are very much based on sort of personal importance and being a threat. If some guy crosses you and you don't kill the motherfucker, everyone assumes you're weaker and they're going to attack you. So even if all he does is flick a bit of dust on your woman, you better kill him, and you better kill him hard. You better necklace him, put a tire full of gasoline around his neck and burn him down. And I think we see this across tribal cultures. I mean, the crazy machismo of Mexico. He said something weird to my girlfriend, so I ate his intestines. You're like, holy crap. But I think that's so, go ahead, sir.
Well, okay. A lot of that I agree with, but some of it I disagree with. And I think we're on the same page as far as the JQ. I think people get obsessed with it. I think they don't take self-responsibility. I think there's a lot of issues with it, but I do disagree with trying to equate all different races and demographics. I mean, I think there is something unique about them. And I'll say this, actually, it's something I respect. And I've dated a Jewish girl, and her parents are super rich. And they're, I remember, but I didn't know. I didn't even know she's Jewish until later, and started to get, red pilled or whatever. That I looked back and go, oh yeah, her dad was Jewish, and and maybe that's, a lot of things started to click in place. And that's actually true with when I went to live in Vietnam, and I grew up with a friend who's Vietnamese. And when you're younger, especially with this brainwashing that they're just like everything's the same, you don't really think about it. You're just like, I wonder why he wears pajamas. He's the only person I know whose family, they all wear pajamas. It's like something out of the 50s. And then I went to Vietnam and I saw it, and this sounds kind of like trivial, but there's many more things that I'd meet someone and I go, it's like they're like, it's more, it's their soul, it's their personality. There's a lot of traits that I think is more than just cultural, because the South and the North are very different, but you'd see. Anyways, I'm going off topic. So what I wanted to say though is about the Jewish thing. I'm trying to start this website, right? So a lot of the podcasts I try to listen to, trying to take a break from politics, is business. And of course, Jews are overrepresented in business, and they do it better than anyone else. And there was a certain thing, I was watching a speech by a guy, he's a Hungarian Jew. What's his name? Simon Sinek or something like that. And anyways, he was giving a speech, and, hey, I can edit it, so I'll just put the speech here.
So a friend of mine and I, we went for a run in Central Park. The Roadrunners organization, on the weekends, they host races. And it's very common at the end of the race, they'll have a sponsor who will give away something, apples or bagels or something. And on this particular day, when we got to the end of the run, there were some free bagels. And they had picnic tables set up and on one side was a group of volunteers. On the table were boxes of bagels, and on the other side was a long line of runners waiting to get their free bagel. So I said to my friend, let's get a bagel. And he looked at me and said, the line's too long. And I said, free bagel. And he said, I don't want to wait in line. And I was like, free bagel. And he says, nah, it's too long. And that's when I realized that there's two ways to see the world. Some people see the thing that they want, and some people see the thing that prevents them from getting the thing that they want. I could only see the bagels. He could only see the line. And so I walked up to the line. I leaned in between two people, put my hand in the box, and pulled out two bagels. And no one got mad at me. Because the rule is, you can go after whatever you want. You just cannot deny anyone else to go after whatever they want. Now, I had to sacrifice choice. I didn't get to choose which bagel I got. I got whatever I pulled out. But I didn't have to wait in line. So the point is you don't have to wait in line. You don't have to do it the way everybody else has done it. You can do it your way. You can break the rules. You just can't get in the way of somebody else getting what they want. That's rule number one.
Super Jewish, because he said, bagels of all things, and it's a story he's telling about him and his friend, and I just kind of assume his friend is a goy or a Gentile or whatever, but I'm not sure. And I think this is something, and Greg Johnson had mentioned it, and I can't find it. I wanted to sample it. I could not find it anywhere, but I heard him say that there's some sort of like I would call it moxie or some sort of like chutzpah, I guess you could call it, that and I really respect it. I really do. But I think that's part of why they're hated is that no matter what, no matter the odds, they somehow find their way on top. And I think it's because they're irrationally optimistic. You could say greed, you could say whatever, but it's basically what you need to be an entrepreneur. It's what you need to make your dreams come true, to whatever it is, to get the girl you want, to travel and get the, whatever, go to the school you want to, blah, 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 blah. And so I think, it's high IQ. I think it's all these things, but it's not a coincidence that it's them. And I don't think it's just high IQ either. And this is something... I'm not trying to just name drop. I'm trying to give credit where credit is due because these weren't my ideas. But I remember seeing Vox Day say this in a debate with someone, I think it was on Twitter, that if it's just high IQ, Chinese would be in all of these positions. And you said this in one of your articles when you talked about, spoiler alert, it was the article where you're talking about the other and we need to exterminate and it's most likely, or not we need to, but people will. And at the end you revealed, spoiler alert, that you were talking about Chinese, not Jews. And you weren't saying that we should. What your point was that, hey, any group that gets to the top because of, merit or otherwise is going to be, scapegoated. But I think there's a reason that yes, Chinese people have similar traits, and yes, they're in higher, oligarchical kind of states or whatever you want to call it. But I think there's something unique about the Jewish people, and I do respect it in a certain degree. But at the same time, I think it's self-destructive. It's not sustainable. When you have that mindset, you can become, whatever, the Steve Jobs. You can do certain things. You can achieve a lot, but you can also sacrifice family. You can sacrifice the environment. You can sacrifice the longevity of the country. There's a lot of things. So I don't think that's the only case. But this is a whole other debate, and I'm not an expert on it. So I wanted to ask you. Let's move on to the anecdotes, because you had said, and this is basically the whole point of the podcast, and what I want to focus on is less about current events, more about personal experiences, emotions, feelings, all that stuff. Because there's a myth that right-wingers and anybody who's a race realist, they're just an ignorant redneck, and they're just jealous that someone took their coal mining job and they're living, they're Luddites and blah blah blah. All this it's absolute bullshit. It's not true from my experience, and some of the most intelligent, well-traveled people I've ever met are the ones who are race realists. And but I also find that they're not always so angry. I think there's a lot of like you were saying, like admiration and sympathy that you had for these people. You saw that they were kind of tortured, and you could see their point of view. So can you give a few anecdotes of personal experiences, and can you clarify as well? You said your society in the beginning. You said your society is dying. For the listeners who don't know, I'm currently in Moscow. I'm from America, born and raised, Western white guy. Not a 56%, but might as well be British, German, whatever. Can you tell the audience what, like, if you're identitarian or communitarian, where do your loyalties lie? I guess. I mean, you say, I assume because your site is America. Were you born there? You grew up in a Russian neighborhood. when you say civilization, do you mean all of Western civilization, or how do you differentiate what you're talking about?
Well, that is a complex question, but it's got a simple answer, and that is Western civilization. I identify with the group of people who came out of Europe of a Nordic Germanic root, who manifested in the United Kingdom, except Ireland, of course, in Germany, in the Netherlands, in northern France, and in Scandinavia and related countries in that area to some degree, and who came to America, and I think came here not because they were individualists, but because they were sick of society, a society that had become overgrown in Europe and too manipulative, which makes sense when you look at how small Europe is. They ran out of land to some degree and started turning on themselves, which was a surprise to them because I think that Europe's survival had been so tenuous to that point. I mean, the Black Plague, the Muslim invasions, the Mongol invasions, the religious wars, the internal wars between kings. We'd been through just a stream of hell, and it amazed us that we'd survived. But I think at that point, things kind of went bad because you had constant power struggles in Europe and, to some degree, enforcement of ideological conformity brought on by those. And the type of person who went to America was just kind of like, I want away from society. Hell is other people, as a noted French thinker once said. And so they got out to the open land. They were pioneers. They wanted to make something happen that was just them and their hands and their brains interacting with nature and with reality because they were sick of other people. And so if America has a founding, not myth, but impetus, I would say that it's antisocial behavior. We realize that at some point places get crowded and the needs of the many, which aren't actually needs, but are fears and delusions and desires and self-expression and all that nonsense, those outweigh the need to pay attention to reality. And to an American, we just want to get to some place where you're dealing with reality-based questions. Did I line up this gun correctly with this bear? If I did, and if I loaded it correctly, the bear dies and I live. If I didn't, RIP, natural selection, for me. Can I make these crops grow? Can I defend my family from these Indians? I think those are American questions, and we are the frontier people. We are pioneers. We saw that Europe was heading down the toilet from its own internal instability, and we got out. Now, Europe managed to survive to some degree, but its internal instability culminated in the French Revolution, the various leftist revolutions, and finally World War I. So to some degree, we made the right choice. We got out of a dying concern and moved to a new place. And I think that's very Western. I think our people were originally wandering around Asia and Europe as nomads because they simply didn't trust organized civilization. They realized that once you set up an organized civilization, the horrible human archetype known as the bureaucrat comes out and starts making rules, and rules benefit the weak, and pretty soon you've got all these dummies sitting around telling you what to do. And the strong are enslaved by the weak, as opposed to the natural order, which is the weak enslaved by, or perhaps more accurately, excluded by the strong. And so the American experience, I think, is as European as anything in Europe. We saw that there had been a calcification, a buildup, too much going on, too many people, too many weak people, and we moved on. And to me, the core of our identity remains Western Europe, because Western Europe is the part that didn't mix. Eastern Europe decided that it wanted to be part Asian. Southern Europe has admitted all sorts of things, and they have taken on characteristics of those societies. Spain and Italy, well, it kind of looks like Arab architecture here. The language sounds Arab. The people look Arab. Eastern Europe, well, here we've got a whole bunch of churches that look like they've got some Asiatic design influences. The people look Asian. And they have certain cultural attitudes and behaviors that are closer to the Chinese than the Western European. I get a lot of flack for picking on the Irish, but I point out that they essentially are a group that came in through Iberia that had Middle Eastern origins. And you can see it in them. They look Middle Eastern. Same way, if you took an Italian, loaded him into Photoshop, and turned up the white levels, you'd have an Irishman or a Spaniard. They're very similar populations. And so do I make a big deal of this? I guess so. but I'm a realist first. So I'd like to talk about what's real first and before anything else. And most people want me to mediate it with politics. Well, you got to think about the optics. We really need the Irish support. And I'm thinking, you know what? Any Irish person who's worth having on our side is going to acknowledge truth. And if he can't, we don't want him on our side. He's another liar. And we've suffered so much from liars. And so I am associated with Western civilization. That's what I care about. My branch of Western civilization is the South. We are an occupied people in the southern half of the United States who are of WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant descent. We tend to be English, German, Scots, Scandinavian, Dutch, some French, occasional Belgians, that kind of thing. But basically, we're Western Europeans, and we see ourselves as having a Nordic Germanic origin for the most part. We look Nordic Germanic. We're identifiable from a distance by these traits, and our thinking is different. We talk about the Jew and how with chutzpah, the Jew is able to get ahead at many things, and we wonder, why does the WASP not do as well? And I'd say that Jewish people are exactly as you would expect from their genetics. They're mostly white with some of the Asian and something from North Africa in there. So they're bolder than whites. They're less idealistic and heroic and contemplative than whites. And by whites, I mean WASPs, Western Europeans. And they're more aggressive. And they have an incredible business acumen brought about by, if you look at where Israel is, being the trading nexus of Asia, Europe, and Africa. This is a group of people who grew up in an intensely competitive environment, which rewarded expertise at business. And not surprisingly, they're excellent at it. And I think it gives them a confidence that comes from oversimplifying everything to, well, this is a business question. I mean, I always envied my Jewish friends because, well, white people had all this drama of, well, am I doing the right thing? Is this good for my immortal soul? Am I maturing as I want? Is this the life experience I want? And those are important questions. And I think they're part of the beauty of the European, that we think about life as a joyous, beautiful, transcendental experience. I think that's very important. But we were saddled by all this crap where the Jewish person would just be like, is it popular? Does it make money? Does this meet the minimum requirements of what I need to do? White people looking at colleges would be like, well, where do I want to go? Does it have the right rowing program? And a Jewish person would be like, I'm going to rank all these colleges from 0 to 500. I'm going to pick the best one that I think I can get into, and I'm going to do whatever I have to get into that college. And I'm going to do it several years out because I'm a canny businessman. So if I want to go to Harvard and they have a rowing program, well, by God, I'm going to figure out how to row 4 or 5 years before I apply so that I can get in. What's the SAT I need? Well, this is a test. I can beat any test because every test is based on some sort of formal organization. And once you learn how it thinks, you can do really well at it. And I'll get ahead. And I admire this. I mean, I admire their aggression. I think there is a certain masculine aggression in the Jewish population that explains a lot of their success. When they go into science, the white person is thinking, well, I have to understand how this whole thing works. I need to understand the depth of it, the breadth of it, yada, yada. The Jewish person is saying, well, let's look at what's happening and let's see where there's growth fields, where there's opportunities for advancement, that people don't know things, but I bet if I go in and tie together the most compelling research, I can find out roughly what I need to do and carve out a little place for myself. There's just, their thinking is simpler than that of the Western European. It's less transcendental, it's less idealistic, it's less heroic. It does not have the finer distinctions, the great amount of detail, the qualitative assessment that Western Europeans have. It's primitive in a way, but it's also several steps ahead on the chessboard, and it's very practical in that it understands business and people in a reductive way that makes them out to kind of be sort of talking monkeys with car keys, but then again, that's kind of correct. That's how people behave. So, understanding what it is to be Southern or Western European requires a certain amount of brutal realism and looking at your people as a set of advantages and disadvantages. And I love my people. I think we have a heroic, idealistic, and transcendental mindset that I find completely beautiful, and that in my view is the only thing that really could save humanity, because it gets us out of the horrible, short-sighted reductionism that I think every other group on Earth, especially the Asians, has. But I know that it makes us weak, because for for so many tasks that are simple questions, we have many, many associated questions and context-related questions that slow us down. So we are both weak and the ultimate strength. We need protection. We need societies that are organized around us. We need respect for the type of things that we care about. And that means we have to walk apart, not just physically, but also mentally. We have to be like, yeah, it's great. I'm glad that the Chinese are succeeding doing X, Y, or Z. We're going to do this instead. And we're just going to, go ahead and do what we need to do and recognize who we are instead of worrying about what, quote unquote, works for other people. And I was going to add really quickly about the Chinese. I find them very fascinating. And one reason that I think most people don't see them as what they are is that they very carefully hide their ownership of things. I don't know how many times I've been in a shop and investigated by talking to the employees to find out some old Chinese guy owns it. And you're like, this is a shop with an Anglo name. It looks like an Anglo shop. Everyone in it is Anglo. What's the owner doing? And you're like, it's a Chinese guy. And I'll tell you this, when they are in your neighborhood, you're going to notice a real decline in infrastructure because they are masters at cheating on their taxes, and they all do it. And that sounds like a horrible racist thing to say, but you know what? I don't blame them 1 minute. I think if I were a businessman looking at America's tax system, I'd be like, wow, I'm paying 60% of this crap to keep an underclass afloat. Well, screw that. I'm going to, I'm going to deduct 60% off this if I can and screw these people because they're chumps. They're chumps and idiots. And I think that the Chinese have that viewpoint. I think they are, you start talking about how we need to pay for the welfare system, and they're like, what the hell? And the roof Koreans from the LA riots, I was fortunate, you might want to put that in quotes, fortunate enough to be in LA for the riots and to witness what was going on. And I think the roof Koreans had a very libertarian mindset, which is we show up, we offer you services, we charge as much as we can, because that's what's in our interest to do, and that's what anyone would do. And when you start rioting and your Anglo police turn out to be useless because, we can't beat another Rodney King, that would be bad, then we're going to get up on the roof and we're going to open fire. And the fact that we can't really see 3 dimensions is not going to stop us. We're going to get lead flying down range at these people to the point that they back off. And I admired those people. I thought, that is an extremely realistic viewpoint. If you have a shop and you're in a society that's too dysfunctional to defend it, you need to get up on that roof with your Tech 9 or Mini 14, and who cares if you hit anybody? Just scare the hell out of them, shoot at them until they run away. And I think that that's a different mindset too. So, when we look at the Western mindset, I think we are innocents. We're babes in the woods. We think that we should create a society where there aren't race riots. And we think that there's a way to do that. And there may be among Western Europeans, but it doesn't extend to other groups. And like I said, every diversity itself is the problem that makes us miserable, but every group has its own peccadillos, as we might call them, Africans love violent crimes. Jews love pornography. Chinese love cheating on their taxes. Koreans love cutting corners in some brutal ways, and they love fake brand names. Mexicans love basically not doing anything with infrastructure and driving drunk. Every group has its own disadvantage. And that relates to who they are. And I think that, people turn that into a stereotype to pick on the group, but I'm like, well, every group has something like this.
All right, this seems like a good time to stop for part 1. We'll see you all in part 2.